Any moment, President Trump will make an announcement from the White House. The president is expected to announce that the use of the painkiller acetaminophen, oftentimes known as Tylenol, but not always Tylenol, that if that's used during a pregnancy, it could contribute to the development of autism in children. We're going to take you live at the White House when the president does begin speaking. Now, ahead of that announcement, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt held a press briefing.
I would encourage everyone in this room to go into the 4 o'clock announcement with some critical thinking skills and with some open ears to actually listen to what the president and his team of outsiders have to say about this. And there will be a number of things that will be announced and discussed. And I think, I know as a mother myself, I speak, I believe, for many mothers across the country who really want answers to what is happening to our nation's children. So again, I won't get ahead of the president, but I think everyone in this room needs to tone down the judgment before you even hear what people are going to say.
Former White House Director of Strategic Communications during President Trump's first term, Mercedes Schlaps, joins me. Nice to see you, Mercedes.
Great to see you, too.
Let's talk about Charlie Kirk's memorial. And I think a lot of people watched Erica Kirk. And the one thing that captured everybody is when she said that she forgives the young man. And that and then a few minutes later, President Trump says that he hates him. And I must admit, I feel like President Trump.
Right.
But I thought to myself, boy, Erica's such a better person than I am.
Well, I mean, it was truly, I think Erica, even when she gave her speech last week, showed, I think, this strength, this courage, her unwavering focus on, I love my husband, I'm going to continue to live out what he was doing here on Earth. And I think it's a beautiful tribute to this widow, who literally stood up there and said, I forgive the assassin. It is something that she also said, this is what Jesus would do. So she is living out her faith. And although there's so much anger because we've seen the loss of a great guy, a friend of ours, it also shows that, you know, Erica is going to live out what she believes is her Christianity, which is, I think, was central to their marriage.
You know, watching her, I believe her.
Yeah.
I actually believe her. But I also, not in a million years would I feel that way. I can't see myself in a million years ever feeling that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, Greta, you come from the legal world, too. I mean, you were a prosecutor. You're tough. I'm not.
No, I was a defense attorney. I defended Jeff Kennedy. I defended people who did these things.
Right. But I think for Erica, you know, her faith is central to her life. It showed very clearly in her speech. I think their marriage, that's how they lived out their marriage. It was Christianity and God in the center of their marriage. And, you know, I think it's very brave what she decided to say. And I think it's a message. You know, it reminded me of Pope John Paul II when he got shot and he went over to the prison and met with the man who tried to kill him and forgave him. And that's, I think, something that's very inspirational. It's, you know, there's those people who are going to be yes, should there absolutely be justice? Absolutely. Should he pay the legal price for what he did in murdering this innocent man, this leader? Absolutely. With that being said, Erica is coming to terms with her own reality, which is the fact that she will not have Charlie next to her side. She will be raising these children on her own. And yet she showed this beauty, I think, this absolutely, this beauty in the sense of how she described, you know, what she experienced during that time, and knowing that she wants to forgive this man, but also knowing that she's got a big job ahead in filling Charlie's shoes.
Well, she also said, I mean, I listened to it carefully. She also pointed out, and I thought it was significant, that in spite of this assassination, this murder, and which affected a whole lot of people across the country. You see that by the number of people who showed up. There was no violence.
Mm-hmm. Well, they show this contrast between when it was the George Floyd killing and that sort of, you know, that summer where there was one burning building, burning car, cities being destroyed, all these loud protests. And then instead, this is in contrast to Charlie Kirk, which was worship music, talking about Jesus Christ, honing in on these values of family and faith and country. They even told the people who were attending this memorial, wear red, white, and blue. They didn't want to make it into just this tragedy. It was converting this, and the word they used, Greta, was revival. It was a spiritual awakening that I think is going to have a long-term impact, especially on our youth, that maybe they weren't involved in politics, or maybe they did get involved in politics because of joining a Turning Point chapter and because of Charlie Kirk. And this has only ignited, I think, just a much stronger movement. I know we're at CPAC getting a lot of calls from people saying, how can we get even more involved in this freedom movement? I think it's really spreading, which for a long time, remember, conservatives were silenced. If you were supporting Trump, you couldn't talk about it. And then all of a sudden, I think people have woken up.
Well, I also point out that the Democratic politicians in Minnesota, after they were brutally murdered in their home, there was no violence then either, you know.
Yeah, I think you know, obviously that was a horrific tragedy. They moved forward with a bipartisan congressional resolution, basically talking about the atrocities of that shooting in Minnesota. I think Charlie Kirk just really represented, he was just almost bigger than life in that way. And obviously being very close to President Trump, in essence, I think seeing that assassination happening, so it was such a vivid, horrific picture that you can't really get it out of your head, Greta.
Yeah, you know, we all look at it through a different, some people look at it through a faith thing, some politics, some youth. But I guess for me, I just thought, okay, so last night when it ended, everybody went home. She goes home to her house, or maybe it's tonight. She shuts the door, says goodbye, and she's got these two little kids. And her whole life, which is true of all murder victims' families, is they're turned upside down. But this was in such a spectacular way that you get to know the murder victims' families.
You know, I got to say, I think it was Second Lady Usha Vance. Erica asked Usha, you know, how am I going to get through this? And Usha said, it's going to be 15 minutes at a time. And you realize, like, at that point, somehow God gives you the strength, he gives you the fortitude to be able to persevere, to be able to raise these children, to know that you're going to have to continue doing this one step at a time. It's not going to be easy, but she has such love and such support coming from the conservative movement, from her own family. I think that it will, you know, I think it's obviously very difficult, but I think for her, she's so well loved. And I think obviously we got to keep praying for her and her family.
I mean, there was a tiny bit of levity in what I thought was much appreciated when Don Jr. imitated his father. He does a really good impression of his father. So a little tiny bit of levity, which I think was appreciated.
And you saw President Donald Trump giving Erica a big hug and having this very, you know, almost father-daughter conversation happening off stage, you know, and it just shows the love that the Trump family had for the Kirks.
Back in 1985, I had a client who was charged with murder, and it was Oprah Winfrey's first documentary. It was on my client who did a brutal murder, and she titled it "No One Dies Alone."
Oh.
And it's just, you know, which is so true, is that no one really does die alone. Mercedes Schlapp, thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
There's breaking news. Guess who's coming back? And tomorrow night, late night TV host Jimmy Kimmel will be back on air. This after he's removed following his comments about Charlie Kirk's assassination. Moments ago, Walt Disney Company released a statement that reads, quote, "Last Wednesday, we made the decision to suspend production on the show to avoid further inflaming a tense situation at an emotional moment for our country. It's a decision we made because we felt that some of the comments were ill-timed and thus insensitive. We've spent the last days having thoughtful conversations with Jimmy, and after those conversations, we reached the decision to return the show on Tuesday," end quote. Coming up, we're waiting for the president, but in the meantime, thousands gathered to remember the life of Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk. You're going to hear Erica Kirk's moving words when the record continues. We're awaiting President Trump to deliver remarks about autism. Meanwhile, a massive memorial was held in Glendale, Arizona at State Farm Stadium for Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk. According to law enforcement, between 90 to 100,000 people gathered to remember Kirk. Kirk was assassinated on September 10th while speaking to students at Utah Valley University. Yesterday, the Turning Point USA's founder wife, Erica Kirk, said this.
My husband, Charlie, he wanted to save young men just like the one who took his life. That man, that young man, I forgive him. On the afternoon of September 10th, I arrived at a Utah hospital to do the unthinkable, to look directly at my husband's murdered body. I saw the wound that ended his life. I felt everything you would expect to feel. I felt shock. I felt horror and a level of heartache that I didn't even know existed. But there was something else too. Even in death, I could see the man that I love. There was no fear, no agony. One moment, Charlie was doing what he loved, arguing and debating on campus, fighting for the gospel, the truth, in front of a big crowd. And then he blinked. He blinked and saw his Savior in paradise. After Charlie's assassination, we didn't see violence. We didn't see rioting. We didn't see revolution. Instead, we saw what my husband always prayed he would see in this country. We saw revival.
Former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum joins me. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Greta. Good to be with you.
You know, listening to Erica Kirk, I'm reminded of a story I covered in 2015 at the Emmanuel African Methodist Church in South Carolina. There were a group of African Americans who were having a Bible study class, and a white guy came in, and they invited him in. He was there 45 minutes. They were discussing the Bible with him. Very gracious to him, and suddenly pulls out a gun and murders 9 of them. And I covered the story, and after that story, I remember so many of those parishioners, the relatives of the dead, as well as others, said they forgave Dylan White. And I thought, where do you find that in yourself? Such a heartless, ruthless, racist, everything. And like Erica, you know, they forgave him.
I was actually at that memorial service in Charleston. I sat in the back and witnessed before and during and afterwards people living their faith, people who understand that their faith is about someone who gave his life so they could have eternal life, and that, you know, the Lord's Prayer is, you know, forgive us our trespasses, forgive us our debts, forgive us our sins as we forgive others who trespass against us. That's a prayer that Christians say daily. It's one that is known to all Christians, and the center of the faith is God's forgiveness of all of our sins, but it requires a radical forgiveness on our part. And it is amazing to see it in practice, because we don't. Because, of course, we're all fallen. We don't live up to the calling of our faith in daily life very often. But to see it in such a big way so soon after her husband was taken from her in such a public way was just really inspiring, as it was in Charleston, South Carolina, for me 10 years ago.
You know, it's interesting, though. I mean, I always hear about forgiveness and everything, and it's okay if it's the other guy should forgive. But when it comes right down to you, yeah. I mean, in both those instances, by the way, there weren't riots when all those blacks were massacred by that white supremacist in Charleston either. But, you know, it's like, you know, we can't even get along in Washington. And we can't forgive for stupid things people say on TV, and then all of a sudden, you know, they're canceled or something like that when they say something really stupid or insensitive.
Well, because really we've removed the humanity out of our politics, and we've removed faith out of our politics. If you go back and listen to speeches from presidents really up until the time of JFK, God was central to almost every speech a president gave to the nation. It was part of our civic discourse that faith was central to who we were as Americans, and it wasn't just a belief in God, but in fact God's moral teaching to us and how to live our lives. It was expected. There was a moral component. Again, we didn't always live up to it, but it was an expectation that that's how we were to behave. And we've sort of lost that. And when you lose it from the elites, when the elites abandon it, then it has that filtering effect on down through the population. And we see the worst of it actually in Washington, but it's reflected across the country.
But it's like if you disagree, you got the devil in you in this city.
Yeah. No,
it's like you're just a horrible person.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've always been accused of, they call me a hater, and for a variety of different positions that I take, and I said, look, just because I don't agree with what you do doesn't mean that I think you're a bad person, and vice versa. Just because you behave in a way that I think is wrong, or you believe something I think is wrong, doesn't make you evil. And Charlie understood that. He actually went into the lion's den. I mean, the worst place where the indoctrination occurs, which is college campuses. And he basically said, look, you've been lied to. You don't know the truth. I knew Charlie when he was 18, 19 years old. And Charlie, wasn't the same Charlie Kirk as he became. He sought the truth. He pursued the truth with all his might, and he had tremendous gifts. And he arrived at the Charlie Kirk you see on these YouTube videos because he was a seeker of truth. And what Charlie believed is that if other people would seek the truth, really commit themselves and openly to do so, that they could be transformed as he was. And I think conservatives need to think more about that, as to how we engage the debate and we try to transform people instead of condemning people.
I should say, and you've been quite public about it, I think written a book about it, so I'll say this sort of, is that you have lived your life of your faith. I must say, watching it from a side, I mean, I know things have gone on in your life, you've written about it, but you've been consistent, you've lived your faith, you and your wife.
Well, we try our best, and we've been very, very blessed. And one of the things that I'm inspired from Charlie, I'm actually heading to Yale University tomorrow to go speak to the Yale Political Union. And I used to do a lot of college campuses, and it's just so happened I had this one scheduled. I don't do that much anymore, but it encourages me to not just come out here on Newsmax, which I absolutely love doing, but to get out there into the fray a little bit more and not be afraid to proclaim the truth.
Well, good luck tomorrow. I once got booed at Yale because I asked the audience what safe spaces was. That was like 15 years ago. I'd never heard of safe spaces. But anyway, they taught me. Anyway, Senator Rick Santorum.
I've been booed a few times at Yale, too. I look forward to it. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Okay, is the bromance back? Yesterday, at Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk's memorial, President Donald Trump and his former senior advisor, tech tycoon Elon Musk, reunited. The pair were spotted shaking hands and having a conversation. Following their interaction, the White House took to X to post this photo of the president with Musk. The caption reads, "POTUS X Elon Musk for Charlie," end quote. Musk reposted the White House's post on his X page. And coming up, Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman joins me. That when the record continues. Sunday, the United Kingdom recognized a Palestinian state, as did U.S. allies and Israeli allies, Canada, Australia, and Portugal. France has also announced its intention to do the same. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calls the move a huge reward for terrorism. For more reaction inside Israel, Middle East correspondent Zach Andrews is in Tel Aviv. He joins me. Zach?
Hi, good evening, Greta. Prime Minister Netanyahu's office has promised Israel will respond in the coming days, with ministers in his government coalition calling for deeper annexation of the West Bank as a response. Now, recognition of Palestinian statehood, that's nothing new. It's been on the table for decades, but it does come at a time when Hamas still governs the Gaza Strip, and while the Palestinian Authority struggles to maintain their standing in the West Bank. However, both of those arms of Palestinian leadership, if you will, are celebrating this building momentum in the West toward their end goal of an independent Palestinian state. Hamas was celebrating in their social media posts earlier today. And take a listen here to the spokesman for the Palestinian Authority.
Britain is an old ally of the United States and Israel. Now it's taking the right direction, the right policy, and this is very important. And we encourage all countries to recognize the state of Palestine, because this is the only way for peace and security in the area. Without a Palestinian state, without the two-state solution, there won't be security or peace in the region as well.
And here in Israel today, it is Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, so most businesses, government buildings have been closed. However, the official X account of the State of Israel posting today, quote, "Recognition is nothing but a reward for jihadist Hamas," emboldened by its Muslim Brotherhood affiliated in the UK. Hamas leaders involved themselves openly admit this recognition is a direct outcome, the fruit for the October 7th massacre. Don't let jihadist ideology dictate your policy. Meanwhile, Israelis are reacting on the streets of Jerusalem, including those with family members who are still held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. Take a listen.
This will not change a single thing. We are on the verge of the 2-year mark of this catastrophe that both Israelis and Palestinians are suffering from. And recognizing a Palestinian state will not bring back a single hostage, nor will it save a single Palestinian baby. Because if someone is killed in Gaza, having a Palestinian passport will not bring them back to life. And if someone is taken hostage and is still in the basements of Hamas, the fact that now Hamas is a sovereign country will not solve anything in this issue.
And this while the ground offensive continues to expand in Gaza City. Notably, Israeli tanks have been seen rolling deeper inside the city today. Now, I'm told by sources here, Israeli ground forces are progressing perhaps faster than some expected and meeting less resistance than some expected, with a thought process here that potentially a lot of the Hamas men who were planning or could have been planning to engage with the IDF on the ground inside the streets of Gaza City may have been moving into the evacuated zones, those humanitarian refugee areas, perhaps with their families. That's something that we'll have to wait and see how fierce those battles get inside those streets and behind those tall buildings. These are the scenes inside Gaza City this morning following an Israeli airstrike on a multi-story building. Now, eyewitnesses tell Reuters a 5-year-old girl was killed here in the strike. A lot of these people being told to evacuate, told to go to those refugee areas along the coastline in the south. We were told they think more than 400,000 have done so, but that still leaves the majority of the city's pre-offensive population inside that city as this is taking place. Now, back here, it is the Jewish New Year again. Israeli leaders know that even more states are being actively recruited to recognize the state of Palestine. Israel's UN ambassador, Danny Danon, described today's events as a circus. And again, we're hearing a lot of Israeli leaders in Jerusalem knowing that this has some pretty serious implication for their standing and their meeting's diplomatic favor with the rest of the world, that this is going to be a path that once things start to go and gain momentum, a lot of Israeli leaders telling us behind closed doors they're worried about that building momentum and what that could mean for the rest of the world. Greta?
Zach, before I let you go, it's quite challenging what goes on in that region for a lot of reasons. But here's the problem, is the West Bank is governed by the Palestinian Authority with an 89-year-old man. In Gaza, it's been Hamas since 2007 because they had a huge feud, and it was Hamas that beat out the Palestinian Authority. So they are not friends. And so, they're not going to work together, assuming that Hamas is allowed to thrive. So what is the expectation? I mean, what do people on the streets think? Who's going to lead these two territories? What's going to happen to them? Because Israel's caught in the middle of it.
That's the question that everyone seems to be asking on the Israeli side, that France, the UK, those states that are recognizing the state of Palestine today don't seem to have an answer for. France has come with press releases and said, well, we could work with Arab partners in the region, try and build up potentially an independent Arab state authority that will come into Gaza, because that's the main concern right now, is what does Gaza look like? The Palestinian Authority in the West Bank has been somewhat status quo for a long time, and that's shared sovereignty. The Israeli forces come in, come out, and share that area with the Palestinian Authority. But there really does not seem to be, in all the stipulated messaging, or all the messaging that is coming from these states that are recognizing the state of Palestine, the day after, who is going to lead? What is going to be the governance? We do not get a lot of clarity, and Israeli leaders are rightly pointing that out.
Give me a little education on the Israeli government, because Prime Minister Netanyahu will be landing here in the United States in New York to speak on Friday before the United Nations. And it's a very, in general, a very unfriendly forum for the Israeli Prime Minister. What has he said? Has he said anything, or what is his government saying about what these nations are doing in recognizing Palestine state?
Well, he has to be very careful for a couple of reasons. The Abraham Accords are one. You don't want to upset or rock the great political achievement of President Trump's first term that started to build momentum towards peace in this region. The UAE, a signatory of the Abraham Accords, is saying do not annex any additional portions of the West Bank. That will be a red line that they cross, and that could collapse the Abraham Accords. It's unclear if they're really willing to follow through on that threat. The UAE here, the Emiratis, if they would actually pull out of the Abraham Accords as a result. But everything I've been told in the last few days is to wait until the Prime Minister is at the General Assembly and delivering his speech, that we're expecting a lot of, we're expecting some big moments to come from this assembly here, and from Prime Minister Netanyahu's statements that are soon to come.
Is there any indication, what's the number, most recent number for how many hostages are still alive?
How many Hamas men?
How many hostages are still alive?
We still believe that it's 20. The number of hostages in total, 48. That was 50 about a month ago. They recovered 2 bodies of the dead hostages. They still think it's 20 living. We just got another video that was released today by Hamas. Somewhat, it was a lot better. I'll say the image of this hostage in better shape than what we have seen in the last previous videos that Hamas has released, where they are skin and bones. But you also are in that category, that area where we don't know when this was filmed. We don't know if that hostage is specifically still alive. And Israeli intelligence, which usually at the beginning of the war, Israeli intelligence was giving a lot of this information to the hostage families. The hostage families would then somewhat give it to the press here in Israel. That has slowed down with this last remaining core group of 20 individuals, men, who are still in there. And that's the big thing that the Israeli public, as it's here tonight and everyone's together at dinner, that is the moment that so many people are talking about, praying for. There was a hostage families gathering outside the Prime Minister's residence tonight. They held their Rosh Hashanah dinner outside of his house, and police surrounding them, trying to disperse this, again, protest of hostage families. So it's still a very difficult moment here.
Well, it seemed like Steve Witkoff was practically shuttling back and forth from Washington to Tel Aviv, Washington to Qatar, trying to negotiate the release. Now I hear nothing. It's like it's gone into a dark hole. Is there any diplomacy being done? Not that it'd be particularly successful, I don't think, but is anything being is there any effort at this point?
We do believe there is, but the element that has really upset this moment, or any momentum, was, of course, Israel's strikes on Qatar. And we do believe, based on all the available evidence, that the intended targets are still alive. Those Hamas leaders that were sheltered there are still there. So back on September 9th, there was a potential, a hope that there could be some sort of deal done. Hamas was not willing to agree to, by all accounts, from what we're hearing from U.S. sources, the terms that were dictated them. President Trump saying, it's your last chance. This is your last chance to accept a deal, release the hostages now. They did not do that. Israel's strike. And now Qatar saying they're not going to mediate this process anymore and be the go-between between Hamas and the U.S. or have any sort of mediating role unless Israel comes out and apologizes for the strike in Doha, which they have not done so yet. So Qatar is saying, as of today, that there has been no progress on their end mediating the talks. We haven't heard anything official from the U.S. side, so we don't know for certain what conversations are taking place. There's been some reportage today that says that Hamas has sent a letter to the White House and said, we'll accept a 60-day truce and give you half the hostages. Again, that is so far apart from what has been agreed to behind these closed doors and what they were working on a deal. And Hamas continues to implode any opportunity when the option they have right now currently from the U.S., from Israel, release all the hostages at once.
Well, Qatar's sort of an unusual case because it's been the place where the negotiations have gone on. On the other hand, it has been the place that was the home for Hania, who was the leader, who went from zero income to $5 billion or something estimated at his death when he never held a job. And as I always said, he didn't invent the iPhone. He got a lot of money pretty fast, and curiously so, probably off the backs of the UN UNRWA. He probably, was stealing money there. And at the same time, Qatar doesn't want any of the Palestinians in their country. Neither does Egypt. Egypt doesn't want any Palestinians in their country. Nobody's sort of stepping in to sort of try to relieve some of the pain there. Because if Egypt let Palestinians come from Gaza through the Philadelphia corridor into Egypt, that would take some of the pressure off the Palestinians. But they don't want them.
I think the element also to this that we're watching very closely, Greta, is that the Egyptian military is building up quite a bit of military hardware. We've seen comments from Prime Minister Netanyahu that this is in violation of their previous agreements about the Sinai. And we see images. This is a pretty militarized area, by the way, the Sinai, as you head towards the Gaza Strip. On the Egyptian side, the Egyptian army has a huge presence there. We're seeing some videos. They're very interesting of tanks and armored personnel carriers moving and staging in that area. And we really don't know what that's about when we see this movement of Palestinians. The IDF telling us that they were trying to get the entire Gaza Strip into an area along the beach, along the Egyptian border. Basically, that bottom left corner, they were trying to push and shove everybody in that direction. Of course, not everyone is heeding those evacuation warnings. But at the same time, you have to really, and we have been behind closed doors asking those kind of questions of what is the plan here? Is there an intent when everyone's going to be moved into a refugee zone and the GHF, the American contractors, are building new distribution sites for the aid and the food, all in that one corner down by Egypt? Is the plan at some point to try and move Gazans out or try and push them into Egypt? Israelis are telling us, no, that's not the plan. That's not the intent here. But the logistics of all this and how Egypt is reacting, you really have to wonder with Gaza being, and I've seen it with my own eyes, it is not hospitable. It's not livable. It's rubble in most places. How are people going to live there, and how's this rebuilding process going to come about? We see so much conversation coming out of the White House and Jerusalem talking about what could be a rebuilding process, and it does involve moving a lot of Gazans out of there. So you wonder where we are in that process and in those conversations if this is truly a movement to try and push a population of 2 million people somewhere else.
It's just extraordinary. I don't know why you do, but it would be very helpful, the right word to use, if any of these other countries would accept some Palestinians because they don't want to live like this, live in fear as they are, as the Israelis continue their military operation. Is Israel, it's a tiny country, everybody's in the military practically, are they getting battle fatigue? How much longer can they fight this?
Great question. At this point, I would imagine that most of the frontline service members, the men that have been fighting since October 7th, are exhausted. They tell me as much. The reservists are exhausted from continuing to be called up into service because those reservists have normal 9-to-5 jobs. And the government is paying their workplace, paying their place of work or wherever they are in the interim to take away their employer and put them into military service and go fight inside the Gaza Strip or be relocated otherwhere along other borders. And that's something that just it has a huge economic toll as well. And you really are starting to see the strain of all of this. The Prime Minister has been saying that we are becoming, he came under fire last week for his comments about becoming Sparta because he's saying we're so isolated right now. You go into the markets and you don't get the same assortment of fruit because some countries have stopped shipping to Israel, and you don't get that same variety of product. And that's really, it's just wearing on everybody. It's a war. It's a wartime economy, and having these men, these young men that are younger than I am, fighting for now 2 years with not a clear end in sight. Perhaps these other conflicts were of a tremendous success with Iran, with Lebanon, and Hezbollah, and everything that has taken place in Syria. Those are all incredibly positive developments for Israel. But Gaza continues to be this massive amount of energy and expending resources towards a war aim and a war goal that is nowhere close to being met, and that's returning all the hostages, completely destroying Hamas. If you ask, it depends on who you ask in Jerusalem, but some people will tell you that no, Hamas is nothing like what they were before. Some people will tell you that Hamas has recruited even more men into their fighting ranks as a result of this, and they're ready to continue to do this as they have been for generation after generation, that they can keep going and fighting. It's about when Israel decides that this is enough.
Zach Anders, and your reporting is very important for this week. You've set the table so people understand all the speeches before the UN this week about this very important issue, as well as the Prime Minister Netanyahu on Friday when he reacts to what's going on around the world in terms of the recognition as well as the war. Zach Anders in Tel Aviv, thank you.
Thanks, Greta.
Coming up, it is said that the man who represents himself has a fool for a client. Ryan Ruth learned that the hard way when the record continues. Ryan Ruth's trial just went off the rails because of him. Ruth is accused of attempted assassination of then presidential candidate Donald Trump at Trump's Florida Golf Club on September 15, 2024. On Friday, the prosecution rested. I'm going to interrupt. President Trump is walking into the room. We're going to take you to the White House right now.
And it's not that everything's 100% understood or known, but I think we've made a lot of strides. I wish it was done a long time ago. Today, we're delighted to be joined by America's top medical and public health professionals as we announce historic steps to confront the crisis of autism. Horrible, horrible crisis. I want to thank the man who brought this issue to the forefront of American politics along with me. And we actually met in my office, is it like 20 years ago, Bobby? It's probably 20 years ago in New York. I was a developer, as you probably heard, and I always had very strong feelings about autism and how it happened and where it came from. And he and I don't know, the word got out, and I wouldn't say that people were very understanding of where we were, but it's turning out that we understood a lot more than a lot of people who studied it, we think. And I say we think because I don't think they were really letting the public know what they knew. Thanks as well to the director of the National Institute of Health, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, FDA Commissioner Dr. Marty McCary. These are great people. Administrator of the Centers for Medicine and Medicaid Services, Dr. Mehmet Oz, and Acting Assistant Secretary of HHS, Dr. Dorothy Fink. So thank you all. Thank you, Dorothy, very much. The meteoric rise in autism is among the most alarming public health developments in history. There's never been anything like this. Just a few decades ago, 1 in 10,000 children had autism. So that's not a long time. And I've always heard, you know, they say a few, but I think it's a lot less time than that. It used to be 1 in 20,000, then 1 in 10,000. And I would say that's probably 18 years ago. And now it's 1 in 31, but in some areas it's much worse than that, if you can believe it, 1 in 31. And I gave numbers yesterday. For boys, it's 1 in 12. I was told that's in California where they have for some reason, a more severe problem. But whether it's 1 in 12 or 1 in 31, can you imagine? That's down from 1 in 20,000, then 1 in 10,000. And now we're at the level of 1 in 12 in some cases for boys. 1 in 31 overall. So since 2000, autism rates have surged by much more than 400%. Instead of attacking those who ask questions, everyone should be grateful for those who are trying to get the answers to this complex situation. And the first day all of these great doctors behind me were there, I told them, this is what we have to find out. Because when you go from 20,000 to 10,000, and then you go to 12, you know there's something artificial. They're taking something. And by the way, I think I can say that there are certain groups of people that don't take vaccines and don't take any pills that have no autism. That have no autism. Does that tell you something? That's currently, is that a correct statement, by the way?
There are some studies that suggest that, yeah, with the Amish, for example.
The Amish, yeah, virtually. I heard none. See, Bobby wants to be very careful with what he says, and he should, but I'm not so careful with what I say. But you have certain groups. The Amish, as an example, they have essentially no autism. First, effective immediately, the FDA will be notifying physicians that the use of well, let's see how we say that. Acetaminophen. Is that okay? Which is basically commonly known as Tylenol, during pregnancy can be associated with a very increased risk of autism. So taking Tylenol is not good. All right, I'll say it. It's not good. For this reason, they are strongly recommending that women limit Tylenol use during pregnancy unless medically necessary. That's, for instance, in cases of extremely high fever, that you feel you can't tough it out, you can't do it. I guess there's that. It's a small number of cases, I think. But if you can't tough it out, if you can't do it, that's what you're going to have to do. You'll take a Tylenol, but it'll be very sparingly. It can be something that's very dangerous to the woman's health. In other words, a fever that's very, very dangerous, and ideally a doctor's decision, because I think you shouldn't take it. And you shouldn't take it during the entire pregnancy. They may tell you that toward the end of the pregnancy, you shouldn't take it during the entire. And you shouldn't give the child the Tylenol every time he's born and he goes and has a shot. You shouldn't give a Tylenol to that child. All pregnant women should talk to their doctors for more information about limiting the use of this medication while pregnant. So ideally, you don't take it at all. But if you have to, if you can't tough it out, if there's a problem, you're going to end up doing it. The other thing that I can tell you that I'll say that they will maybe say at a little bit later date, but I think when you go for the shot, you do it over a 5-time period. Take it over 5 times or 4 times, but you take it in smaller doses and you spread it out over a period of years. And they pump so much stuff into those beautiful little babies. It's a disgrace. I don't see it. I think it's very bad. They're pumping, it looks like they're pumping into a horse. You have a little child, little fragile child, and you get a vat of 80 different vaccines, I guess, 80 different blends, and they pump it in. So ideally, a woman won't take Tylenol. And on the vaccines, it would be good instead of one visit where they pump the baby, load it up with stuff, you'll do it over a period of 4 times or 5 times. I've been so into this issue for so many years just because I couldn't understand how a thing like this could happen. And you know it's artificially induced. It's not like something that, when you go from all of those, healthy babies to a point where I don't even know structurally if a country can afford it. And that's the least of the problems. To have families destroyed over this is just so terrible. I also, and we've already done this, we want no mercury in the vaccine. We want no aluminum in the vaccine. The MMR, I think, should be taken separately. This is based on what I feel the mumps, measles, and all the three should be taken separately. And it seems to be that when you mix them, there could be a problem. So there's no downside in taking them separately. In fact, they think it's better, so let it be separate. The chicken pox is already separate, because when that got mixed in, I guess they made it for a while, it really was bad. So they make chicken pox. Individually, they're okay. When you mix them, something maybe happens. So there's no downside in doing it. It's not like, oh, if you do it, bad things. No, it's only good side. And it may not have that much of an impact, but it may have a big impact. So let those be taken separately. And then hepatitis B is sexually transmitted. There's no reason to give a baby that's almost just born hepatitis B. So I would say wait till the baby is 12 years old and formed and take hepatitis B. And I think if you do those things, it's going to be a whole different, it's going to be a revolution in a positive sense in the country. The FDA will be updating the label of an existing drug to reflect potential benefits in reducing some autism symptoms. This gives hope to the many parents with autistic children that it may be possible to improve their lives. That's one of the things that I'm very, very happy about. I mean, this was mostly going to be on how not to have the child affected, but we've learned some pretty good things about certain elements of genius that can be given to a baby, and the baby can get better, and in some cases maybe substantially better. Not going to be easy, but be a lot easier if it didn't happen in the first place, as these great parents fully understand, right? They fully understand. I feel so terribly for. I have so many friends with autistic children. It's a tough situation. Finally, to help reach the ultimate goal of ending the autism fever, the NIH will be announcing 13 major grant awards from the Autism Data Science Initiatives. And to be honest with you, to me, that's the least important. It's not even a money thing at this point. There's so much money, but they have to do, and they have to move quickly. When the alternative is that nothing bad can happen, let's do it now. I was just saying to Bobby and the group, let's do it now. Nothing bad can happen. It can only good happen. But with Tylenol, don't take it. Don't take it. And if you can't live, if your fever is so bad, you have to take one, because there's no alternative to that. Sadly, first question, what can you take instead? It's actually, there's not an alternative to that. And as you know, other of the medicines are absolutely proven bad. I mean, they've been proven bad with the aspirins and the Advils and others, right? And they've been proven bad. So I'd like to ask Bobby to get up to the podium and say a few words, and then Dr. Bhattacharya and Dr. McCary, Dr. Oz, Dr. Fink, followed by two incredible mothers that have experienced firsthand what this country is going through, what parts of the world are going through. And I will say there are parts of the world that don't take Tylenol. I mean, there's a rumor, and I don't know if it's so or not, that Cuba, they don't have Tylenol because they don't have the money for Tylenol, and they have virtually no autism, okay? Tell me about that one. And there are other parts of the world where they don't have Tylenol, where they don't have autism. That tells you a lot. And I want to say it right now. And, you know, the way I look at it, don't take it. Don't take it. There's no downside in not taking it. So I'd like to ask Bobby to come up and say a few words. I hope I didn't ruin his day, but that's the way I feel. I've been very strong on the subject for a long time. You know, life is common sense, too. And there's a lot of common sense in this, and I wish things like this were brought up, and this group has worked so hard on it, but I'd like to be a little bit more, a little speedier in the process of a recommendation, because there's no harm in going quicker. There's absolutely no harm. At worst, there's no harm. Thank you very much. Bobby, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. To meet the President's challenge, I ordered HHS to launch an unprecedented all-agency effort to identify all causes of autism, including toxic and pharmaceutical exposures. At President Trump's urging, NIH, FDA, CDC, and CMS are turning over every stone to identify the etiology of the autism epidemic and how patients and parents can prevent and reverse.
People think news just happens. It doesn't. It happens because there's someone there to capture the moment, to explain it and share it. That's my job. I go where news breaks and give you the facts. Join me for The Record on Newsmax.